Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about if one employer uses something and another employer uses something else and how to think about this sort of stuff. So let's get into it. So I'm a little bit rusty now, guys. I've been on vacation and yeah, I'm basically back. For you, it shouldn't make any difference because I queued up enough videos so that this is going to be released somewhere in October. Imagine that, right? But let's get into the question in question. So basically, I had a person reach out in the comments section, and even though I was on vacation, I actually did reply. And the question was basically, Fredrik, I have this decision to make where, all right, so what should I focus on? Like for me, it's very important to get the first language correct, right? And it's important for me that I pick an employer or a language that is used by an employer that sets me up for success, right? So the issue here, and this is the thing I wrote back, is that although the language that you pick has a fairly big bearing on the tone of at least the first few years of your career. It absolutely matters to a degree. It is not as important as the employer themselves, the company, if you will. Now, the reason why it's not as important is because even though I could sit here and let's say something like in this specific scenario, the decision was between PHP and Java, right? And the problem here is that I can just say, yeah, sure, you should go with Java for job security, as an example. But without knowing the company itself and their work practices, that might actually be quite a lot of bad advice. And the reason is very simple, because there is not necessarily a mapping between the company's work practices and the sort of development that is being used or being done at that company and the language itself, if that makes sense. I mean, it's kind of like, there are companies out there who do, let's take an extreme example, who does web application work with C, even though that is a very rare use case indeed for C. It's still something someone might do. So what I argue is that it's much more important to pick the correct employer. Now, I've said this to a few people who's been asking about this as well. You see, the reason why the employer is more important or the company is more important is because when you start out, the most important thing isn't the programming language that you are working in. It is that you get the support and the environment that you need in order to actually grow as a developer. Now, unless you want to stay at some specific company, or if you decide to just work in very specifically in one specific language or things of this nature, it is very unlikely that you will spend the rest of your career working in the same language. I myself have switched language many times, and it's not that big of a process to do this sort of thing when you know how to work as a real professional or how to actually do this sort of work. And that's why the company is more important, because if you start working at the low end at some smaller little consultancy or like an agency or a design firm or something like that, odds are that you will learn a form of development, but it's not strictly, it depends on you and it depends on the nature of the work. But you might find yourself in a situation where you find it hard to get into more serious companies, more serious IT companies and things of this nature, because you haven't really focused on learning the core skills of programming, because they are the same regardless of if you're in Java, Ruby, PHP, Python, Go, pick your whatever language, right? So that's the first thing. Like the most important thing is to get a company, ideally a company that is a little bit bigger. Doesn't have to be big, but like a little bit bigger, where they have senior staff that will help train you. That is more important than the language, a lot more important. So if you find that, as in this scenario, okay, so you have one company who is offering a position where you do Java and one that offers PHP. I mean, for most people, Java is associated with large enterprise development, but it could be that this is actually being offered by a small consultancy firm somewhere who does some very, very niche to specific work. And the PHP project that this person is talking about is actually, I don't know, provided by Facebook. I don't know. Anywho, then that should be the consideration, because even though you may not get all the benefits, or like it may differ, and maybe in long term you want to work with Java instead of PHP or vice versa, that is not as important. You should of course pick what you find most interesting, but let's just for the sake of argument say that okay, there is no big difference between the two projects, they're kind of the same. And if that's the case by some miracle, then yes, then things such as language becomes more important. And in this scenario, I would suggest that what you focus on is to ask yourself this fundamental question that I've asked many people many times before. What is your end goal? Now, in this scenario, if your end goal is like maximum job security, then Java is the way to go. It is, depending on your region, of course. I mean, you always have to check the job postings first. But if you're going for beginner friendliness or developer experience, things like this, then PHP is probably a better choice. At least from my experience, developer experience is usually a lot of more people enjoy working in PHP than in Java at times. This is very subjective, guys. There's no universal truth to this. But to reiterate, the language is less important. What's important is the environment. Because trust me, when I say this, I can just imagine the scenario where, and this is the scenario for quite a lot of PHP developers, where you go into some very small agency or firm, you mostly work by yourself as an island, or like in semi-isolation with inexperienced managers who don't really, they're running this tiny little company somewhere, and you do that sort of work for quite some time, and then you find it hard to go and actually get into the larger companies where you do more serious work. This is usually not the case if you go into, it can happen, of course, in any language or company and so forth, but if you can avoid that, that's very good, because it's going to rob you of the most valuable thing that you can get in the beginning, and that is real work experience, and that is a lot more important than language. So what I want you to take away from this is basically that when it comes to picking your first language, and like if one company is offering, like is working with one thing or another thing, that's less important. If you have a personal preference in language, to go for it, but if you don't, and I'm just stating that I think you should be just a little bit flexible here, because if it stands between a company who's offering you, both of them are offering you money and training, which is much more important than what specific language they're using. At the very least in the beginning, because the first thing that matters to companies is if you can actually do professional grade work, and you don't necessarily always have to be a master of the language that they're using at that company. They might be open, and quite a lot of them are, they're open to you taking some time to just learn the language, because learning the language and the syntax, it takes like what? A few weeks, a few months at most, but training somebody to be a professional grade software developer, that takes years. And if that's the sort of training you're going for. So focus on the work environment, focus on the company, make sure that you get into an environment where you have peers, you have coworkers of a more senior profile that can help you evolve as a developer. And if you have an offer on the table where both of these things are being given to you, ask yourself, what is it that I actually want? In this scenario, is it job security? Then Java might be a very good pick. If it's a developer experience and beginner friendliness, so you get productive quicker, then maybe PHP is the way to go. Each language, regardless of which one you pick, has certain work and certain benefits and consequences associated with it, and those are the sorts of things that you need to consider if you have a pick. That's at least how I feel about it. Have a great day.